Nothing in this podcast is meant for medical advice. Please discuss your own healthcare with your healthcare providers. Thank you. Welcome to your B-side, your midlife metamorphosis. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Lindsey. Midlife is not a crisis, it's a catalyst to your best life. Join me each week for a dose of mental, physical, and spiritual health, life, grief, adventure, and opportunity. It's time to flip the record over. Did you know that menopause only lasts one day? Hello and welcome to your B-side, your midlife metamorphosis with Dr. Amy Lindsey, your host. Today we're going to talk about menopause, one of those midlife phenomenons that affects so many people every day for years upon years upon years. So why did I just say that it lasts one day? Well, I'll get to that in a minute. First, I want to encourage you, if you're listening to this podcast, to go take a walk if you're not already. Grab your shoes, walk outside, and just go for a little walk. Take a break from whatever you're doing and get some fresh air. Because we process information better when we're moving. And actually, a good walk with some fresh air is great for our mental health. And that is going to be one of the key topics of today's conversation, is your mental health. So why would I say that menopause is only one day? Well, here's the thing. The definition of menopause is once you have not had a period for 1 year, then you're considered 1 year post-menopausal. So let me say that again. Once you have not had a period for 1 year, you are considered post-menopausal. And before that, you're considered perimenopausal. So when is menopause? Well, it's one day. It's exactly the first day after your last day of your last period. It's the first day after your last day of your last period. But here's the thing, you don't know. You don't know it because you don't know if you're going to have more periods until you've been a year and then you're considered postmenopausal. That is actually the definition. So here's the thing though, I'm not going to get into semantics. You can say you're in menopause for days and years all you want. But here's what I'm going to address. I'm going to address what is actually going on in perimenopause leading up to that menopause point and then into postmenopause. So it's not what you think. Perimenopause can last 10 to 20 years. And when most people think of menopause, they think of it as something lasting 6 months to 2 or 3 years. But this motherfucker, perimenopause, can begin as early as your late 20s, and it can go as long as 20 years. And how do we define that if we're not just looking at periods, right? Okay, so let me explain. The first sign of menopause or perimenopause is not hot flashes and skipped periods. I'm going to say that again. It's not hot flashes and skipped periods. That's what everyone is so focused on. But the first sign is usually irritability, anxiousness, inability to sleep, and starting to feel a dread, like a dread for your life or a sense of hopelessness. And it's because it's right as your hormone changes are happening on a physiological level. But that, believe it or not, your body and your brain are connected, and it's having an impact on your nervous system, and it's having an impact on your brain. And so as you start through that early perimenopause, the first thing to look for is not, am I having a hot flash? Or the first thing to look for is not even what are my estrogen levels, and I'll explain that in a second. Because when we start into perimenopause, we start to notice significant changes in mental health. And up until this point, your hormones have just been bathing you in their hormone glory, for better or for worse. And once they start declining and waning like that, then it's almost like the veil is lifted, okay? And you start noticing what you've been tolerating in your life, what you've been tolerating that you can't tolerate anymore. It's almost like if you haven't flipped the record over onto your B side, it's now. It's right at that beginning of perimenopause. Because I'll tell you, what you've been tolerating in your life is part of that status quo bullshit. And that's that side A of the record that I talk about. And it's time to flip the record over to your B side. So I'm going to lay this out like a perimenopause talk, just like we got our period talks back in the day. And bear with me because I am going to lay it out in a textbook way. I'm going to just sort of lay it out what the average or what sort of the textbook layout of this stuff is. And just so you know, every person going through perimenopause is going to have their own experience. Everybody has their own genetics. Everybody has their own way that their bodies metabolize hormones, that they synthesize hormones. You know, there's plenty of people out there who are going to have a different experience, and actually their hormone levels and the way that they change will be different, okay? But I am just going to give you a groundwork so that you can ask the questions you need to ask of your doctor and you can start getting ahead of it yourself. So, textbook. Progesterone starts to wane first. Now, progesterone is your hormone that is in your luteal phase of your cycle. So the second half of your cycle, the first half of your menstrual cycle is the follicular phase, okay? And then you ovulate, and then you go into your luteal phase. Progesterone is one of your feel-good hormones. It actually helps sort of calm things down in your brain. And it's also great for your thyroid, for keeping your cholesterol in control. It's good for bone building, muscle building. Progesterone does so many wonderful things in your body. It also is, for people who are in fertility, progesterone is like what keeps the baby in, right? Progesterone like helps your uterus build and keep the baby in if you're pregnant, okay? Progesterone's great for your hair. Progesterone is a lovely hormone. And it's the first to start declining. Again, textbook, okay? Not everybody has this experience. So when it declines, based on everything I just said, you can imagine. So if it's the hormone that's making you kind of feel calm and calming your brain down, and it actually helps you sleep, then when progesterone starts to decline, guess what? You're going to feel a lot more anxious. You're going to have a lot more ruminating thoughts, potentially. You're going to struggle with sleep. A lot of people in early perimenopause who have declining progesterone then start experiencing challenges with their thyroid. Then they start having high cholesterol that seems to have come out of nowhere. And then their blood sugar starts to spike. And one of the conditions, or actually it's a whole spectrum of conditions that tends to show up, is autoimmune conditions. So autoimmune flares can flare when progesterone starts to decline. And so that's also why a lot of people, a lot of biological females in their early stages of perimenopause will have their first autoimmune experiences. And some of that is connected to that progesterone. Not all of it. Our bodies are very complex, right? But that is sort of the kickoff, okay? The other thing to understand about this is that your progesterone is in balance with your estrogen. So earlier I said simply getting your estrogen tested is not going to tell you if you're in perimenopause, especially early on, because you'll go get that tested. Let's say you go get a blood test and your estrogen, it says, oh, it's normal. Okay. Well, if your progesterone is low or tanked out, then in relativity, so relative to the balance, you have more estrogen. Does that make sense? So even though you don't have more estrogen per se, but you're losing your progesterone. And so the gap and the balance between the two is thrown off. And a lot of people who are in perimenopause, especially in that early stage, they actually have heavier periods because of this. They actually have fibroids, or they have fibrocystic breasts, or they have other things that arise that would be estrogenic. The other piece of this is depending on your genetics and depending on a lot of things, right? Could potentially be a dangerous period for estrogenic cancers that are linked to estrogen. Because once that progesterone kind of drops, then the estrogen is having a more intense exposure in the body, if that makes sense. Now, that's just like, genetics play into here, your enzymes play into here, how your body metabolizes estrogen and progesterone play into here. All kinds of things play into this, but this is just giving you kind of a lay of the land here. The other thing that declines is dopamine. So we've been talking about dopamine a lot on this podcast, but when progesterone declines, dopamine declines. And dopamine is your reward center. So you may find yourself in that sort of mental health place of feeling more anxious, feeling restless, not sleeping well. And when you don't sleep well, you're not going to feel good, right? And if you're feeling in that place of a depressed mood or hopelessness or some of these feelings, and then add to that your dopamine has declined and your reward centers have declined, that I have found, and I mentioned this a couple episodes ago, that people then seek out dopamine hits, right? And it's part of this mental health process. It's normal. It's what people are doing. But one of the things that gives you more dopamine is alcohol. One of the things that gives you more dopamine is online shopping, like retail therapy, booking vacations. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with any of this stuff. But you might start noticing yourself looking for dopamine, even though you don't understand that that's what your body's trying to do is get more dopamine. Hey, this is Dr. Amy Lindsey, your host of Welcome to Your B-Side, your midlife metamorphosis YouTube channel and podcast. If you want to be more involved with my B-Side community, you can join on School. That's SKOOL. You can join my school community. Look me up, Dr. Amy Lindsey. Welcome to your B-Side and request to join. So this is also the crux of what people call a midlife crisis, because a lot of these mental health challenges start to show up at this time. But what I'm saying in this podcast, in the through line, through everything I'm trying to say here, is that this is your opportunity. And that midlife is actually a gift. And that perimenopause is actually a gift because it does lift that veil. And because you are suddenly challenged with maybe more mental health challenges than you ever thought you would have. Maybe you're more challenged with physical health challenge that seem to have come out of nowhere. And then now is the time to grab a hold of that. Now is the time to start to survey your life. See, are you living into the dreams that you've had? Are you living into a purpose that you feel? Do you feel a calling? Do you feel an assignment? Are you living into that? And is your health a match? Is your health a match for whatever assignment you feel like you're here to fulfill on in this life? So remember, all of this happens even before hot flashes, okay? As you progress in your perimenopause journey, then the estrogen starts to take a note from the progesterone, okay? Then the estrogen starts to say, hey, maybe I don't need to do so much work. I don't know if that your ovaries or your estrogen are really having these thoughts, but it's certainly fun to think about. And your ovaries start to decide that they're going to go into retirement, okay? And they start to wane on the estrogen. Now, what happens with this is quite fascinating. So something you should know is that estrogen and serotonin follow each other in the body. There are multiple biochemical reactions that involve estrogen and serotonin. You might have heard of serotonin before. Serotonin is one of those feel-good neurotransmitters that acts like a hormone. And in fact, even in the synthesis, like in your body's ability to make serotonin, estrogen's involved. So if estrogen is waning, then your serotonin is also waning. And then, fun fact, I don't want to get too into the biochemistry here. I don't want to bore you, but if you're interested in this, I love this shit. Your serotonin actually is part of a pathway that then turns into melatonin. So you can understand that the shit is starting to go down in the body, right? If the estrogen is waning, then that means the serotonin is going to wane. Then that means the melatonin is going to wane. Guess what? More lost sleep, more depressed mood. And there's actually a lot more that serotonin, estrogen, and melatonin do in your body. But let's just we're not going to do like a doctorate level biochemistry course right now. But that should tell you almost everything you need to know about why people then have mood swings, why people aren't feeling great, why people aren't sleeping. Okay. And when the estrogen wanes like that, and actually serotonin is linked to this as well, it impacts your body's thermostat. So that's where those hot flashes come from. So then hot flashes start. And then at the same time, your estrogen is going through this kind of tug of war with your brain, where your brain gets the signal that there's not a lot of estrogen in the body. So then it sends a messenger to your ovaries like, hey, what are you doing? Get back to work. You're not ready to retire. Make more estrogen, and then estrogen will surge. And so at sort of that later perimenopausal state is where there's surges of highs and lows of estrogen, which causes all kinds of impacts in your body that feel confusing, feels up and down. And that's why a lot of antidepressants are prescribed at this time. Now, I'm not against antidepressants. I have absolutely prescribed them myself, but I will say I do think they are a little overprescribed, especially for females going through perimenopause and menopause. But I understand it. And there is like a biochemical reason for it, because remember, I told you that serotonin and estrogen tend to work together. So sometimes like a serotonin reuptake inhibitor like an SSRI or another sort of serotonin-based antidepressant will work on things like hot flashes and sleep and mood in someone, so I can understand why they're readily prescribed. There are other options though, and there's safe hormone prescribing. I'm not going to go through the whole thing right now, but just know that that study that was done and everybody freaked out in the early 2000s, and I don't know if it's 2005 or 2006, there was this big press conference that was saying that HRT was dangerous and everyone was going to get cancer and die and have heart attacks and strokes. And there's been a lot of research since, and they found what a lot of the culprits were and the combinations. And a lot of it actually had to do with synthetic progestins, which is not the same as your body's progesterone, okay? I don't want to get into the whole thing right now, but here's my advice. Make sure you talk to your health professional about if you're a candidate for hormone therapy, because just supplementing hormones, even for just a few years, and it doesn't even have to be a lifelong thing, can be just for a few years to sort of ease that transition. That perimenopausal, menopausal transition can be so beneficial for your health, and not just your physical health, but for your mental health. So it's just something to keep in mind. Now, while all of this sounds daunting, I do stand by that this is an incredible opportunity. It's an incredible opportunity to evaluate your life, to evaluate your relationships, to evaluate your career, to evaluate where you're living, to evaluate what you're doing with yourself. Because this is the opportunity to tap in to that spiritual center, to that soul, and to start to ask those questions. What am I doing here on this planet? If I'm not on side A on the status quo, and I flip that record over and I put the needle on that first track of side B, what does my life look like now? What can I look like? And it's also like a calling and a wake-up call to start handling your physical and your mental health. So maybe if you had let it slide a little bit, or you hadn't been paying much attention to it, perimenopause is going to potentially knock you on your ass and make you start paying attention to it. But again, the first signs are not hot flashes and missed periods. That is not what's going to happen first. What's going to happen first is sort of a mental health crisis. Or, some people report that they just sort of don't notice what's happening with them, because the truth is not everybody gets hot flashes, right? Not everybody does. I know that that's talked about a lot in the literature. It's talked about a lot in people's experiences, but it's something like 30 to 35% of people going through perimenopause never have a hot flash. So we haven't even talked about medical menopause, which is when you're forced into it because of medication or because of surgery or because of, you had a hysterectomy or you had your ovaries removed or you had some sort of estrogenic cancer and they had to put blockers in, right? Or you had some sort of medication where you were suddenly thrust into menopause. So that's a whole other experience. But either way, regardless of how you got there, it's the perfect time to have that reckoning with yourself about your life and about your health. And in fact, this is exactly what I do in my chrysalis program. My chrysalis program is literally a chrysalis of people in midlife, all genders are welcome, who are going through these physical and mental health changes and are starting to question what their purpose is. And what we do in there is we connect their life and life goals and purpose with their health. And when those two things are working together, complete and utter transformation happens. Talk about like a rocket ship to your B-side. And I hope you'll stay with me in this conversation that your midlife metamorphosis is an opportunity. Your perimenopause and your menopause and your post-menopause, it's all an opportunity for you to get the health and the life that you truly desire. Have a great day. This has been another episode of Welcome to Your B-Side, your midlife metamorphosis with Dr. Amy Lindsey. Be sure to follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.